Welcome back to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is your host, Russell Bruce, and today we got another good one. So today we're going to be talking about where do Black people get these Irish and Scottish names from. And myself, last name Bruce, and I'm big on genealogy. Anybody that's been following me know I'm big on genealogy. And I want to know things. I want to know, where did my name come from? Was it a name that was given to my people from a slave master? Did they make it up? Like, where did it come from? And the more I dig, the more I find, right? So I look on my family tree and I see not only the Bruces that, originated in the Virginia area here in America, the families that they intermarried with and lived around, they, for the most part, their surnames all go back to Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England. So that sent me down a rabbit hole the last few years, and I've dug up a ton of good information. I'm thoroughly convinced, and probably by the end of this video, you'll be convinced too that the majority of the people came here with these names. So when you hear most Black people say, oh, your government name or your slave name, it's not a slave name. These people came here with these names. Now, were there some people who took on names when slavery ended? People took on names like Freeman, things of that nature, or it may be the last name of, a president, somebody of stature. But the majority of these people, you'll find out, came with these names. So what I'm going to do here, there is a guy by the name of Neophyte Dag. And over the years, I've seen a lot of his podcasts, which I love because I'm not sure if he's a teacher or what he is, but he does a heck of a job of delivering the receipts along with the information. So most of the books that he gave I already had, plus I have some additional ones that I'll share with you at the end. But he does a good job of proving where he got the information from, so he's not just making it up. Because you have people that say things that can't really back it up. But today we're going to bring you the receipts along with the information. So get your pens and pads out. So if you have an Irish or Scottish name, if I were you, I would jot this down, because a lot of people, when they're doing genealogy, they're thinking that we all came here from Africa. And a lot of people, unless you've been asleep, people have found out that that's not necessarily true. So you have a situation where less than 5% of the slaves that came from Africa even came to North America. I'll repeat that. Less than 5% of the 12.5 million that they're now saying on slavevoyages.org came to North America. The majority of them went into Brazil, went into Haiti, they went into Jamaica, Barbados, and other Caribbean islands. But less than 400,000 came to America. Right now, I think there's somewhere around 380,000. And you're talking over not 400 years, say about 250-year time frame. So by the time you break that down and you go in there and find out, matter of fact, I'll do a podcast on that and break it down and show you by the year how many came in and what parts they came into. And we can break it down from there. So this right here on my screen, this is Oliver Cromwell. So he's going to jump in and tell you who Oliver Cromwell is, because he plays a very major role in a lot of these Black, Scots, and Irish coming to America and to the island. So if you're from the Caribbean, from North America, especially if you trace your ancestry back into the 13 colonies, particularly into Virginia, North and South Carolina, New England, that's where the majority of them came into. So once again, get your pencils and papers out, and I'll be making my commentary. This is on Neophyte Dag's YouTube channel. I would say definitely go there if you want to see this video in its entirety. And he has a lot of other good ones on this subject and other subjects. All right, so this is fair use only, and we're going to use it for educational purposes today. Enjoy.
Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell of England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, who was he was a political figure during the time of the 1640s, and he raised quite a controversy because he dethroned the King of England at that time, and the people or the Parliament of England made him the Lord Protector of England because there was no king at that time to succeed the one that he had dethroned and beheaded. So they made him the Lord Protector. This is an image of him, not sure if it's a true image, but this is what's being presented to us these days as the image of Oliver Cromwell. And we're going to stay away from the image. We're going to go with the wording of what he actually looked like and what was his complexion. A bit of history around the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell. He was born in England. He lived in England. He was a member of Parliament, as I have mentioned before. He dethroned the King of England at the time, which was King Charles I, which we have covered in a previous message, who was a person of color as well. And he did that in 1649. Later on, he beheaded King Charles I in 1649 as well. He chopped his head off as part of the punishment that was handed to King Charles I. He was declared Lord Protector for life over England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales in 1653. And he founded and established in the Caribbean the colony in the island of Jamaica in 1655. So this is to all my folks who are from Jamaica, just to know that this is the man that had set up and established the English-speaking country that you're now living in, Jamaica. This is now part of his infamous act. He deported from England, Ireland, and Scotland to Jamaica, Barbados, Virginia, South Carolina, Maryland, New England, many dark-skinned Irish, Scottish people that were loyal to the Jacobites, which were the King Charles I, Stuart line of family and loyalist. And he did that from 1649 to 1658. And I'll pause right here because there's a lot of misconception that he deported a lot of Caucasians at that time. But no, that's not the truth. The truth is these people were dark-skinned people that were deported from these countries into these countries in the Caribbean and North America. The key to note, which I'm going to point out at the end of this message, is the classification as white has nothing to do with your skin color during the time of Oliver Cromwell and King Charles I. Nothing to do with it. It was a social status at that time. If you were a rich person or a poor person, regardless of your color, but you're from Europe, you were given the classification as white if you're living in North America. If you don't belong to any of that class I just described, you were given the classification as black. So let's keep that in mind.
I'm going to stop for 1 second. That's a very big point that he just hit on there. So a lot of times when you're doing genealogy and you'll get back, say, maybe 1700s or so, and you'll see white and you're like, well, you're thinking, okay, well, maybe they were slaves and, these white people owned them. That's not the case, because the thing is, if they list, like, for example, on Ancestry.com, even on Family Search, right? If they list your ancestor, they have their first and last name, and they have them listed there, then they weren't a slave. They didn't list slaves, okay? because they were considered property. And if they did, it was only your first name or it was just an age. So if they list them first, last name, and, indicate that they were there with their family, they were free people. All right. So once again, white was a classification, and so was black. And it kind of flip-flopped later on when America went crazy with race. And that wasn't until somewhere right after Bacon's Rebellion, when they were trying to take away the power, I guess, from a lot of the free people of color who were roaming around in America. We'll touch on that in a minute.
Oliver Cromwell, also deported from England, Ireland, and Scotland to Jamaica, Barbados, Virginia, South Carolina, Maryland, New England, many dark-skinned Irish people, Scottish people that were Catholic or converted to Catholic from 1649 to 1658. There was a religious war going on in Europe at that time. Who were Catholic from who were Protestants. England at that time, and many of the countries that were connected with England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, were also Protestants. They did not want the Roman Catholic to invade into their Protestant countries. So when King Charles was believed to be converting to Catholic, that's when Oliver Cromwell took it upon himself to dethrone King Charles I and wipe out that possibility of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales being converted to Roman Catholic. And anyone who was loyal to King Charles I, or anyone who were Roman Catholic or converted to Roman Catholic as a part of that King Charles I influence, was deported out of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and sent to the Caribbean, the West Indies, which was a classification of Jamaica, Barbados, and North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, New England, and Virginia. So let's get into Oliver Cromwell, who he was in terms of his complexion, because the judges were covered up, painted over, and I have to unpaint some of the judges, even though some of these judges don't have a good character behind them, but I have to let history speak for itself. We'll take a look at this book, Charles I, written by A.E. McKilliam, and on page 139 of this book, it tells you Cromwell was a gentleman farmer from Huntington, Donshire, who entered Parliament at the beginning of Charles I's reign, and we did cover that. If you jump down further, his complexion was muddy and sallow, his eyebrows large and bristling, and his nose red. There was a big commotion about his nose, but we won't concentrate on his nose in this message. We'll go back to his complexion was muddy and sallow. So in these ancient writing, you won't get specifics that clearly. So you'll have to go into another book now to find out what is muddy and what is sallow. To find that out, we'll go to the Webster Dictionary of 1828. This is what it will come back with. Muddy, we'll look at the fifth meaning of it, dark, of the color of mud. So that's telling you he's of a dark color, the color of mud. We'll also pull out sallow, a yellowish color tinged with dark yellow. So putting the two together, he's a dark-skinned complexion person. If you want to put it in our modern day term, he's a black person. I don't like to use that word black, but I have to tie it back to what you're used to, because that's the word that you've been given, but that's not the proper word to identify us as melanated people. We're people of color, we're melanated people, dark-skinned people, but the classification has been pushed down to us as black. So I'll interchange between the two. but we are, and he was a person of color, a dark-skinned person. We'll take a look at another book, Cromwell, the Lord Protector, by Antonia Fraser, on page 63 of that book. Cromwell, ruddy complexion. So now we're getting another classification for his complexion. On that same page, it talked about Richard Baxter, who wrote a description of Cromwell, wrote, his complexion was sanguine. So we have two more complexions that we need to find out what those words mean. Page 231 of that same book, Cromwell was hideously ugly. Again, they didn't like his nose. His nose was a big reddish color nose. His favorite nickname for him were Nose, Copper Nose. What's the possibility of a Caucasian person being nicknamed Copper Nose once you know what the color of copper looks like? Almost next to impossible. This was a dark-skinned person of copper color. Copper is a brown color. So clearly, Oliver Cromwell was a brown-skinned person or a dark-skinned person, whichever one you want to classify him as. But his complexion was sanguine, it's telling you again. Same book, page 577. Description given by a Venetian ambassador. His name is Sangredo. The Lord Protector, he wrote, had a ruddy face, big-nosed. Again, his nose going to keep coming up. His nose was really big and red. Then further down, again, Sangredo, which we had covered, said Cromwell had a sanguine complexion. So sanguine and ruddy keep being used. So let's find out what these words mean. Ruddy, of a red color, so a reddish copper color, dark skin complexion person. You have two types of ruddy. You have a ruddy red and a ruddy yellow. The ruddy yellow is what we would call a brown skinned person. In our modern day term, we'll say it's a light skinned person. So we have dark skin and we have light skin, but they're still of a melanated complexion. We still classify them in our modern day time as black persons. So when you look at ruddy, it's two types. Red, copper colorish, or a light skin color. If you want to get a description of that in your mind, take a look at the comedian Sinbad. He's a ruddy yellow. Sanguine, reddish brownish color. That's why I can tell you ruddy ties back to the reddish brown. Color of dry blood. So you have a red copper color, dark skin complexion person. So I want to settle that one. So when you see ruddy being used or sanguine being used, coming back to the same thing, that means this person is a ruddy red complexion person. And I want to give you some examples of ruddy red and ruddy gold. Visual examples. On the left, that's a ruddy red. On the right, that's a ruddy yellow. One of the key things to note with a ruddy complexion person, they generally have a reddish color hair. That's why you'll get the term ruddy when you see it coming from Europe. You see ruddy, it means this complexion has that ruddy redness and the hair to go with it. That's a ruddy person. Ruddy red, ruddy gold. So take a mental note of that. Another book, Oliver Cromwell. And
all right, we're going to fast forward here. So he spent about 10 minutes or so giving a description of Oliver Cromwell, who was the Lord Protector and the one who actually beheaded King Charles. And for the record, King Charles I was the son of King James, the first of England, King James the Sixth of Scotland. So he was King James the Sixth and the King James I simultaneously, because he ruled over both nations, right? So that's where the UK comes into place, because he united them. King Charles I, his son was King Charles II, who Charleston and who Charleston and Carolina actually gets his name from King James' grandson, King Charles II. And there's another book, if I have time at the end, I'll share, because it gives descriptions of him as a tall black man. All right, so what we're going to do, once again, we're going to move right along here. He's still describing Oliver Cromwell, who was also a black man. So once again, like he said, he's just given a description of who these guys actually were, like, and what they looked like. That doesn't mean they were all good, right? Doesn't even mean King James and his sons were good. Because if you go back and you really start studying the slave trade, it kicked off with these guys because they were the ones who actually established the 13 colonies. At least 12 of the 13 were established by King James, King Charles I, King Charles II, and then King James II, who was the son of King Charles II. And ultimately, Georgia was 13th state, who was a relative of theirs. King George is the one that actually established it. So let's see, we're going to go right around here. We're going to come to a conclusion.
Conclusion, Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales was a dark-skinned person in our modern day time. He was a black man. Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell was responsible for a large amount of European people of color, which we classify as black people, from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales with social status of white to be deported to North America and the Caribbean as political prisoners. Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell was responsible for a large amount of European people of color, which we call black people, from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales with social status of whites to be deported to North America and the Caribbean as religious persecuted prisoner. No doubt about that. But I can't tell you something without being able to prove it. And I'm going to prove it to you. June 1657, an act for the attainder of the rebels in Ireland. This is a law that was passed under the influence of Oliver Cromwell. And what the law says, children and kindreds of persons attainted shall transplant themselves within 6 months and not to return without license, offenders to be apprehended and committed. Persons convicted shall be banished. This is a law that was on the books of England that was passed by the Parliament being run by the Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell in 1657. You can read through it. I've just done some highlights. First, let's look at the highlights in red. Those are the more critical ones. That's who's being arrested and attained and then shipped out as rebels. All and every children, grandchildren, brothers, nephews, uncles, next of kin or next heir, and active kindreds of all and every prisoner that they were holding at the time were going to be deported. So if you're a family member, you're a child, grandchild, brother, nephew, uncle, or you're related to them, you're going to get deported. And look at the exception now, except if you were a Protestant. That's what I was telling you. It's a religious war between Protestant and the Catholic. And there's another exception there. If you were a Papist means a Catholic who have showed that you're willing to convert to being Protestant, or you're not going to rattle the cage of the Protestants, then you were not being deported, convicted, or subject to any of this law. So if you were a Protestant If you were a Catholic that's in good standing, this law won't apply to you. But if you were not any of those two, everything else that's coming in this law relates to you. And this one is for the children and the kins of those who were arrested. They wanted to get them out of Ireland so they won't come back for any revenge or any retributions. There's also a date in which you had to be a Protestant. If you were a Protestant on the 3rd and the 20th of October, 1641, that's the year 1641, then this rule wouldn't apply to you. You would be exempted from this rule. But if you were not, you'll be subjected to this rule, where if you are a family member of those who are being held as prisoners, political prisoners, or religiously persecuted prisoners, you would also be subjected to being thrown out of Ireland, meaning deported from Ireland, because Cromwell and those in power at that time did not want family members, especially the young one, to grow up and now seek retribution or revenge for what happened to their family. To be apprehended and committed to common gaol. A gaol is a prison. That's where they'll hold them. And they shall remain there without bail. Upon conviction of the said person or persons so offending and aforesaid, him or her or them to be condemned to perpetual banishment. Where are you being banished to? To be sent into America or some of the other parts beyond the sea. Beyond the sea is modern term for the Caribbean in pursuance to the said banishment. So this was the law that was on the books to banish those people of color who were led to believe are Catholics or were led to believe are loyal to King Charles I. And the loyalists are called Jacobites. So wherever you're doing research and you come across the word Jacobites, those are people of color, the same color of King James, the original Jacobites, and his descendants, Charles I, Charles II, and some of his other descendants as we move down the line. James II as well.
All right. So he talked about Oliver Cromwell and him ousting a lot of these Jacobites. And that took place in the mid 1600s, right? So he had on the screen here a second ago, and I'm sure he's going to come back to it, the Jacobite transportation that took place in 1715 as well as in 1745. So that's almost 100 years later. They were still shipping these melanated Scottish Irish people out. So we'll continue.
Continuation of this June 1657, an act for the attainder of the rebels in Ireland. These were the people that were rebelling against Oliver Cromwell's imposition of a ban, a restriction on them being Roman Catholic. Continuing, persons banished and returning without a license, returning where? You could not return to England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales once you were banished. Any such person or persons so convicted, banished, and sent beyond the seas, the Caribbean, and North America, shall at any time after such his or her their being disposed into banishment, return into any part of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland without license. What shall happen? Shall hereby be declared adjudged to be guilty of returning to your homeland, England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and suffer the pains of death as a felon by virtue of this act. So the people of color, I'm talking to you guys, if you haven't gotten the message, if you look at your last name, you're going to have England, Ireland, and Scottish names. You were banished from your home country, and if you had tried to return to England, Scotland, and Ireland and Wales, you suffer this pain of death. To prove this to you, I can't tell you things without proving it. Let's look at this book, Irish Immigration, during the 17th and the 18th century. 17th century, that's where Oliver Cromwell had started this process. On page 5 of this book, it's telling you between 500,000 and 600,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered or died of starvation as a result of the attack by Oliver Cromwell in Ireland. Many thousands were sent to the West Indies or to American colonies and sold as slaves. So when you're hearing white slavery, it wasn't Caucasian, it was European people of color because they were classified as white as a result of certain class structure in America at the time, and also depending on the time the book was written. This book was written in 1899, which is after 1676, when the Bacon Rebellion put into effect the white and the black classification. So this author is picking up the language at the time that he's writing this book, 1899, when the Bacon Rebellion effects were in full swing. So this author, Thomas Addis Emmet, which wrote this book, Irish Immigration, during the 17th and 18th century, is writing in the language of the classification in effect at his time of writing the book. Let's get back to this. A limited number escaped to the mountains where many died from starvation, and the remainder lived for years a life in common with the wild beasts. With a price upon their head, they were hunted as such. The whole and entire population of this great tract of country disappeared and was literally wiped out. So what I'm telling you, all the people of color that were in Ireland at this time were either slaughtered, starved out, or sent to the West Indies or the American colonies and sold as slave. I'll give you a moment to pause. Then now I'm going to throw Cromwell in the mix. Shortly after, Cromwell overran both the south and southwestern portion of Ireland. So this is Cromwell that did this. He invaded Ireland, rooted out all the Catholics or converted Catholics and all those who were loyal to King Charles as the king. Cromwell, again, over 100,000 young children who had been made orphans or who were taken from their Catholic parents, as I've been telling you, were sent to the West Indies, Virginia, or to New England. Now, I'm going to try to knock some common sense into my West Indian folks. And here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you something to think about. If 500,000, or in this case, 100,000 Caucasians were sent to Jamaica, Barbados, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Antigua, where are they at this point in time? Where is this hundreds and thousands of Caucasian people? Where are they? Because again, they would be there, remnants of them would be in those Caribbean countries. But it's not, it's a trick on words. They were not Caucasian. They were of the white classification. And that is meant to give you the assumption that they were Caucasian after the classification was changed in 1924 under the Racial Integrity Act. They were not Caucasian. These were people of color. Cromwell was a colored person. King Charles was a colored person. The people that were loyal and that were living in these countries, England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, were people of color. People in America at that time were majority people of color. They were the same people who were enslaving other people of color. Cromwell sold these many people into slavery, and he was a person of color. Hopefully you get the real truth and the idea behind it. Wasn't a Caucasian person selling others into slavery. It was dark-skinned people selling other dark-skinned people into slavery. We have to take the blame where the blame falls.
I'm going to pause right here for a second. You really got to get what he just said, that this was dark-skinned melanated people selling other dark-skinned melanated people into bondage, into the Caribbean, into the island. And one of the things that goes on to this day is it's a crime of omission for commission. So people always are going to ask, and I'm sure they're going to ask when they hear this without hearing it in its entirety, who would do that, and why would they hide this information? Why is this information not taught in the school system here in America if this is our history? Why is it not taught? Because they were replaced with other groups of people when they were removed. So you have a situation where the royals, most of the castles, belonged to these royal families, and they were stripped of all this and sent to the Americas and then to the islands. So do you not think one day they would wake up and want restitution? Not reparations, restitution. They would want what belonged to them back. And that's the reason why there's this great hijack and the information is being held, because not only did they get stripped of their land, the indigenous people in America were stripped of their land. And when you find out, you also have right to that particular land. Like, for example, this is just my Bruce line that's tied to this particular story. So when you look at, you have two sets of grandparents, then you have four sets of great grandparents, 8 great, then it goes, when you get to the third great grandparent level, it goes to 16 and then 32. So when you look, so this is the Bruce line and the people they married into there in Virginia. It came from England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. But all those other lines came from Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and those people were there for thousands of years. All right. And so all of these people were reclassified. Like, people, when they were in Ireland and Scotland, they were just, I'm Irish, I'm Scottish. They did not, color didn't mean anything to them. They intermarried. So you had a large biracial class, if you want to call it that. They didn't even look at it that way. They were just one people. And when they came into Virginia, the Carolinas, they mixed there as well. So the majority of you that hear my voice, whether you're black or white, under this system here in America, which is a caste system, because it really did not start with skin color, not until 1924 under the Racial Integrity Act, Walter Plecker, did they distinguish that white at that point, this was in 1924, meant Caucasian, and that you had pure Caucasian blood outside of maybe having 1/16 Native American blood, which is a story for another day, because Native American's a new term. And that's why Native Americans today don't look like the American Indians of the old world. So anyway, that's just to give you a little background on that. We're going to continue.
Can't cover it up as the Caucasians have done because we don't like what the history is showing us. Let the history speak for itself. Now, this brings me to the question I've asked my Caribbean folks, especially those in Barbados and Jamaica. And I'm going to concentrate on the ones in Jamaica now. I'm going to let you be aware of this book, which was written by Joseph J. Williams. It's called Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica. Where did they come from? These Black Irish. And on this book, there's a cover in it, which shows a typical Black Irish in Jamaica. Not making things up. This is a Black Irish, which support the story that's following the line of Cromwell was a dark-skinned person who was deporting dark-skinned persons to the Caribbean and North America. Have you ever wondered why all these Irish names are in Jamaica? Mac and Blake and this and that, and I'm going to give you a few names to whet your appetite. Why you have an Irish town in Jamaica? Why? Why is there an Irish town, an Irish tradition in Barbados? Why? If you ask yourself the question and you're willing to research your history, you'll find out all the people that were in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales were dark-skinned people that were deported by other dark-skinned people because of their religious preference and their loyalty to the religious crown of King Charles and the King James line of family, which were believed to be converting to Roman Catholic. Take a good look at this book. It's there. Now, let's read from this book what the author is trying to let you be aware of. This is to my folks in Jamaica, especially those in Kingston. A few years ago, and this is in the introduction of this book, a few years ago in one school in Jamaica, Kingston, might be found Burke, Collins, McKay, McDermott, McKeon, and Walsh, with one exception. The last name, who was a dusky brown, they were all of the appearance of full-blooded Negro-looking people. One was a dusky brown, but he's still a person of color. In one school, in one classroom. And I grew up in Jamaica, and I can tell you this is definitely true. We all had English, Irish, and Scottish name, but we were taught that our slave masters gave us these names. That's a lie, people. Get out of the nonsense. This is where it's coming from. The lies are being unveiled right now. We're in the time and the age of truth. There were Collins, Kennedy, McCormick, and O'Hare. These are all Irish names. They're Scottish name too. But we're concentrating on the Irish for now. And here again, in only one case did the feature or complexion indicate any infusion of Caucasian blood. None of them had any Caucasian blood, and they all had Irish name. The entire Jamaica and Barbados are Irish name. Then you want to tell me that all the Caucasians were led to believe that they're in Barbados and Caribbean that were deported by Cromwell, impregnated, and got everyone converted to Negro? Nonsense. Truth will always be truth, and it's catching up now with the lies. Perhaps one of the names most frequently met with throughout the island of Jamaica is Burke, popular name in Jamaica. The usual explanation that we've given, that this book is pointing out, for the presence of Irish name is, of course, that the slave Former days were generally called by the family name of the master. Nonsense. No master want his slave to have his name. If you look at the slave runaway list, there's no last name for any of the slaves that run away. None. Only the indentured servants got last name because the indentured servants were coming from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. That's what it meant that Cromwell sold you into slavery, indentured slavery. Usually 5 or 7 years. If you're good, you'll get out of that indentured slavery. If not, they try to extend it as long as possible. After you got your indentured service done, then you became a free person of color, not Caucasians. That's not true. So this book is telling you that's the usual, but that's a lie. But in the case of Burke, at least we don't find any single planter of the name Burke in the early records of Jamaica. So if this Burke person got his last name from a master that's Caucasian, and there's never a master in Jamaica that has the name Burke, this explanation is turned on its head. It's not true, never was true, and will always be not true. Reading further, and the same may be said in the case of most of the other Irish names that was encountered. Today, among the Negro in the islands, they are not associated with slave masters that were Caucasian. These were dark-skinned Irish, Scottish, and English people that were deported into Jamaica, Barbados, other West Indies island, and North America. This is the same that we can move this scenario into North America. Virginia, New England, South Carolina, North Carolina, same scenario. But staying with the Caribbean, because I want my Jamaican people to know thyself. This is the route of how you arrived in Jamaica. From Ireland, you were deported into Barbados, then shipped from Barbados to Jamaica until the time where Jamaica now was founded by Oliver Cromwell. You were now being deported directly into Jamaica. What I did here, I give you some pictures of the Irish Jamaican kids that were from family that were deported from Ireland. This is what the remnants of them look like now in the beautiful land of Jamaica. From the classroom, there's the Collins, there's the O'Hare, there's the McCormack, the Kennedy, all of them. This is the Black Irish that Oliver Cromwell deported to Jamaica. And I implore anyone to prove me wrong. Bring the facts beyond the white and the black categorization and give me the color, the complexion of those people Cromwell was deporting, and you'll come right back to this. They were people of color. Here it is in front of you. Now, this is a note I want to leave with my readers of books, historical books. Keep in mind, as I've been telling you, the deception that was placed in the language of books that were written. If the book is talking about a time period of 1676 to 1924, and it's written within that time period, it's going to tell you that the people it's talking about were white, but it's not the complexion white, it's the categorization, the classification, the social status white. If a person was from Europe, or they can trace their ancestry to Europe within that time, 1676 to 1924, they had a white classification. If you could not trace your lineage to Europe, you were given a black classification, regardless of your skin complexion. So if you're reading books, you have to now distinguish who they're talking about and what time period they're talking about. If they're talking between 1924 to our present time, the classification changed with the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, and that act was modified in 1930. Now you're no longer given white or black classification, regardless of being from Europe. It's only if you can trace your bloodline to 100% Caucasian. If you had a speck of non-Caucasian in you, you were given a black classification. If you were of a dark skin complexion, you were automatically given a black classification. So that's what I want you to keep in mind when you're going through books. Early period, 1676 to 1924, Bacon Rebellion caused the classification to be changed from just people to white and black. That lasted until 1924. Racial Integrity Act changed it from being from Europe and not being from Europe to being Caucasian to not being Caucasian. With that said, I'm going to bring this message to a close. Pay close attention to the contents of this message. It will open up a lot of hidden history and for you to do some more work to know who you are and where you're from. You're not from Africa. Most of you, high 90-something% of you, people of color, you're not from Africa, even if you're in North America, Caribbean, South America, or Central America. You are native to those lands. Most of you were already there. And then the rest of you were joined by those who were coming from England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, Germany, Netherlands, the list goes on. There were lots of people of color in Europe. They were the dominant race in Europe. During these time that we're talking about, the 1600, the 1700, all the way up until the 1800, the dominant people running the governments and doing all the other things that you're reading about in your history book, majority of them were people of color. Stand strong, be strong, and stay strong.
All right, so once again, that was Neophyte Dag, and he does a great job teaching. Once again, I'm not sure if he's a teacher or not, but he does an amazing job of delivering the message as well as the receipts. And I couldn't have done that better myself. And I've been wanting to talk about this for a while and have been gathering information. And there's so much you have to, like, once again, you can't eat an elephant in one sitting. You got to break it up into tiny bites. And I just thought it was best to go ahead and let him rip, let him play, and talk about, this story and show the receipts. So I'm going to try to wrap this up as well, but there's a couple other things I want to share with you. And you could tell by his accent, Neophyte Dag was from the islands. And this sister here is Dr. Marie Charles, who's in the UK. And she does an amazing job of telling the history from that side of the pond. And she has just recently put out a brilliant dictionary series of surnames. And I lucked up because Bruce fell within her first volume. And I was able to communicate with her on YouTube on one of her threads, like prior to it coming out. So when it came out, I made sure I went on Amazon, purchased my copy. But right here, she talks about the origin of the Bruce name. So once again, I'm big into genealogy. And if you're big into finding your ancestry and finding out who you are, you got to go deeper. You got to find out where your people came from, like where they lived here in America. Like I see my people in Virginia. I go back, I read the history of the county. I buy books about the county. I go online and try to find free books. Matter of fact, most of the books that he just mentioned in that video, you could actually Google them. They're in the domain. They're in the public domain on archive. And you could actually type in PDF in the name of some of those books that he was mentioning in there. And you could actually pull them up and save them. So once again, if you have an Irish or Scottish name, English names, I would actually start looking into some of this information, because a lot of people will just say, oh, you know, the records for African slaves are not there. You're going to find out that the majority of you did not come from Africa. I'm telling you, I had to go down that rabbit hole myself. But let's see what she has to say about this origin of this Bruce surname. You're going to find out this is another way to confirm what Neophyte Dag was saying, that these were actually melanated people. So here's the history of my Bruce name.
What this presentation will show today is that Robert the Bruce and his lineage, his surname, can be traced back to France and Germany. And what we find is that the earliest Bruce or Bruck crest can also be found in Brandenburg in Germany. And Bruce saw a crest from Bruce in Brittany and Brie in Normandy can be traced through their heraldry and their crests to these locations. And so we know through onomastics, which is the study of place names, of the history of place names connected to people, we find the Bruce family originate from a Norman lineage. And the surname is also found in Brandenburg, where Kuno is found. Now, Kuno is related to King Cunobelinus, who is king or ruler in southern Britain or southern Baratanac. And he comes from a long line of Belgian rulers as well. And you will see that research in issue 17. And so we're always finding the cultural connections on the continent, in France and Germany. Yes, we will move into Spain as well. But Scotland finds its lineage, particularly in France and Germany.
All right. So once again, this is Dr. Marie Charles. You can find her on YouTube. She just this past year started her own YouTube channel. She used to appear on a lot of other people's channel. So if you go on YouTube and you just type in Dr. Marie Charles, you might find her on some other people's channel as well as find her channel. Brilliant scholar. And if you could look on the screen right there, she shows this Bruce name originated in Germany. It probably goes even before there, but it shows the migration pattern of the people, right? So Europe really isn't that big. So when you start going from Germany to France and into England and stuff like that, it's almost like just traveling state to state here in America, because they're not that far apart. It's not that big. So she proves that most of these particular cultures, they were all blended cultures. They shared cultures. Like I mentioned earlier, King James and his son, King Charles, his grandson, King Charles II, they were related to King George, who was from Germany. He was a German king because his mother's ancestry came from England. So they're all kind of tied in together. But these are coats of arms for the Bruces, and these are actually registered. So this is not just some cartoon that somebody drew. these are coats of arms proving that these were royal bloodlines. And she mentioned Robert the Bruce. You see movies just like Moses and Ten Commandments, everything. The characters are always shown as white. And unfortunately, in this society, most people cannot erase these images out of their head that they see on television and that were written. And that's why it's even more dangerous when it comes to religion, depicting the Savior as white. I just wish they didn't do any pictures of the Savior, because to me that constitutes, well, you can't even prove that he looked like that, for one. And it is actually a picture of the Pope's son. So that's a story for a different day. But anyway, but digging into real history and seeing yourself in history, it actually like does something for you spiritually, because now you're in the story. Like sitting in school and just watching a Caucasian resume, a lot of young Black students get lost because they don't see themselves. And it's like, for example, if you're with a group of friends, right? And you guys take a picture. Back in the day, we had those Polaroid Instamatics where you take the picture, it comes out, you shake it and let it develop. And ultimately, you have a picture. Everybody passes it around. And when that picture's passed to you, who's the first person you look for in that picture? You look for yourself. And that's why when in history or in the school systems, if it's not self-relating, you don't have a connection to it. There's no spiritual connection. There's really no high interest in it if you're not in the picture. So digging into your own history, you're in the picture and you're going to get true history. And that's what happened with me. Now I have true history. I could actually trace the footsteps of my ancestors through, all these wars. Like those of you who follow me on Facebook see that I have my great great grandfather, Andrew Bruce, on there, who was a Civil War hero. I didn't even know that until I started digging into my history and doing my genealogy. So those of you out there, I'm telling you, if you've never done your genealogy, please do your genealogy. If you need my help, reach out to me. I plan on doing some free classes on the weekends coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. And because I think it's very important that people really find out who they are without somebody else telling you who you are. Because I think that's why a lot of people are running around today not knowing who they are. And, we went from being Indian to being Black, colored, mulatto, African American, you name it. And that just happened in 1985, that we're now classified as African American. But that's another story for another day. But real quick, just want to share one last thing with you. So this is my story. This is my family tree on Ancestry. You can see I've spent a lot of time on this thing over the last few years. But my 4-time great-great-grandparents, Joe and Sarah Bruce, lived in Hardy County, Virginia, which is now West Virginia. So this goes back before the United States even came into existence, which was in 1776. So they lived through that, and they were in Virginia, which was the first state or the first colony when the Scottish Irish people came here. So with a name like Bruce, I seen in the 1785 census, Joseph Bruce was a free man. But then later in the early 1800s, I see that he and his wife, Sarah, and their children end up either as indentured servants. Sometimes it says servant, sometimes it says slave, right? And they end up enslaved to a Dutch family, the Von Meters. And this story is extremely interesting. because it seemed like they had a great working relationship. So it's not the root story that we're told, right? So a lot of us think it was back in the 70s when Roots first came out, the Kunta Kinte story. And you guys, I want all of you guys, if you don't know this, you can Google it. That story was fictitious. It wasn't even real. Alex Haley actually got sued for that. He stole the character and most of the story out of a book called African that was written by, can't remember the author's name. But anyway, he was sued for Roots. And that is the image that most Black people that grew up in that era and seen Roots or even purchased the VHS, or now I'm sure it's probably a DVD and digital. The story was a made up story. It wasn't even true. Like some of those people in the story are names of some of his family members. Kunta Kinte was a made up character. It was stolen from a book. But I could go look at my story, and I don't need to use his story, and I could see that that story did not add up. So Joe and Sarah Bruce are my 4-time great grandparents, and they're also the 4-time great grandparents of Henry Louis Gates Jr. So Dr. Gates, on his series, he's always mentioning his great grandparent or his grandparents or great grandparents that lived there. He grew up in that West Virginia area, like I think he said some 20 odd miles away from where Joe and Sarah were from. And most of them were free. Like, even though I said that he was free, Joe was free, then eventually they went into bondage and then they were free again. 1823, when Abraham von Meter died, and in his will, he wanted them to be emancipated. He and his wife Elizabeth didn't have any children. So he set 5 of the 10 children free along with Joe and Sarah. And then when Elizabeth died, the other 5 would be free. But they pretty much all lived free during that time. And the reason why I say that is because Solomon had a child with Nellie Lett, my great-great-grandfather Andrew Bruce, in 1830, prior to Elizabeth dying. So, and the question is, why would Eleanor Lett, a woman that comes from a pretty good family, and I'll show you a couple of reasons why I say that, comes from a pretty good family that traces back to guess where? Ireland. And she married Solomon, and during that time, and has a child with him during the time in which he was supposedly a slave. Story didn't add up. But anyway, make a long story short, right? Nellie's father was Daniel Lett. Zachariah's her grandfather. And then we go back here. So I'm just going to show you where they came from when they came into Virginia in that time frame, right? So here we go. John Ishmael was the one who came from Ireland into Virginia. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 1655. So we'll blow this up here. And you can see here, this is John Ishmael. It was actually 1651. He was one of the early immigrants, along with another family member that came a year later. And they usually put the person that sponsored them getting here. So a lot of them were fleeing. So during this time, Oliver Cromwell was ousting a lot of them. But then some of the others who had means to exit peacefully, they left. And some of them came as indentured servants. You know, they had someone pay for them to get here in exchange to come in to maybe work 5-7 years as an indentured servant. So here, I'll show you one other thing that I think is pretty cool. And most of you should do this, right? So John Isham Let, but what I'm going to do is say Let surname origin. So Nellie Let, once again, would be my third time great grandmother. And so it talks here about Let. It's an English surname, medieval. Letitia means happiness, German. So you see a lot of these names were either German, French, and these people moved around and ultimately they ended up in Ireland. But I'm going to show you on the House of Names. This page right here is pretty cool. It's a free page that you can go to. Well, that's already up here because I was searching it. So this talks about Let, ancient Anglo-Saxon tribes of Britain, blah, 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 blah. But it usually talks about the people who migrated and where they went. So that migration of the Let family into Ireland. Some of the Let family moved to Ireland, but the topic is not covered in this excerpt. So let's keep going down. The Let migration to the United States. This is what I'm looking for here. So in the 1600s, we see that there's some Lets coming in here. And let's see. So here's a John Let here. All right. This isn't what I was looking for because I did see where John Isham Let was once listed here. So maybe this updates. But this is another way to find some of your ancestors when you're searching. Like, don't just give up and think that, you know, everybody was an African slave and you can't find them and, you know, all that good stuff. The story runs deep. So all I could tell you is to keep searching. Once again, if you need any assistance doing genealogy, you could always reach out to me. My email, rubruce64@gmail.com, rubruce64@gmail.com. And I'll see what I could do to assist you in your search. So once again, this podcast here today was to actually show a lot of where these surnames came from. And once again, when I look here, all these people, if I start clicking on these, I'll see where they're coming in from different parts of Europe, and mainly in Scotland, Ireland, and England. And these were not all Caucasian people. But a lot of these lines, when they come forward, when the documents start listing race, they'll say it was free people of color or free whites or other free people. You know, sometimes you just got to dodge the hijack and just keep doing your due diligence and dig in. Like I said, Dr. Marie Charles, you can follow her. She does a good job of tracking down a lot of the origins of these surnames over in Europe. And particularly, she does a great job with these Scottish and Irish names. And she has thousands of these family crests or coats of arms, you may also hear referred as. And do your research on those and find out the importance of them, because these were actual empires that spread across the sea. So you might have had half of the family over there in Europe and half here, because what you'll find is that you always hear that the Vikings came here early on, and they don't ever want you to think that there were some Black Vikings. There were some Black Vikings as well. And I think in another one of my videos, I think I also have a video called Black Irish in America. And you could look at that one where I go into a couple other books that digs up a lot of the ancient information in Scotland and Ireland. And one of the last things I'll leave you with, you could do a quick Google search or even dig deeper, that the original inhabitants of that land 40,000 years ago were the Twa people, or sometimes you might hear them referred to as Pygmy. And one of the things that you can match that up to is when they were showing these prisoners that were coming over in 1745 and 1715, they actually listed like the names where these people came from over in Ireland, and they would list their height. Most of them were very short statured people, and that's because they were remnants of these Twa tribes that went there 40,000 years ago. And if most Caucasian people are honest, they are not original to Western Europe. They're mainly from Central Asia. That's where Caucasia is located, the Caucasus Mountains, the Caucasus Mountains. And they migrated there. And that, according to some of these books, was around 455 AD is when they came into Scotland. So once again, this is Russell Bruce, Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast, with another episode. Hopefully we'll be back with you guys soon with another banger. Take care. Peace.